I want to talk about God with you. I love the clip.
Dude, now we're opened up. Let's go. Has there ever been a time when you were younger where maybe family or the industry wasn't fulfilling your heart and you called out to God?
And I think I always believed in God. I just wasn't sure he was a fan of me. Like, I wasn't sure he was aware of me. We don't really teach kids about spiritual health in many respects, right? If the means to the end is that you're like a good person and you're kind to other people, like I'm like,
George Janko recently sat down with Josh Peck, and the discussion around God came up, and I wanted to address some stuff that was said in this part of the podcast. So in today's video, we are going to examine what was said and kind of where Josh Peck lands on his spirituality and his views on God specifically. So with that being said, let's take a look at how this conversation unfolded.
I want to talk about God with you. I love the clip.
Dude, now we're opened up. Let's go. If we're going to talk about God, has there ever been a time when you were a kid? Bro, like this is a deep question, and you don't have to feel if you don't feel comfortable, you don't have to answer this. But if we're going to talk about God, this would be my question. In a very godless atmosphere where you're just basically either chewed out or spit out, and a lot of children grow up very, very broken when they're in this industry because they're a product of their environment. Has there ever been a time when you were younger where maybe family or the industry wasn't fulfilling your heart and you called out to God?
Now, before we get into Josh's response, guys, I think this is a wonderful question. This is a great question by George, and I'm going to be curious to see what Josh's response is to this, because a lot of people do view the industry that Josh was in, that celebrity industry in Disney and Nickelodeon, very dark. And do those kids at that age seem to have a moment of just surrendering and calling out to God for help? We'll see what Josh has to say.
I feel lucky, right? My access point to God and spirituality is the 12-step program. So I got sober at 21 years old, and it's not a prerequisite. Like, you don't have to have a higher power, but it's helpful. Yeah. And so it's allowed me to sort of look back at what was my relationship with God before that. And I think I always believed in God. I just wasn't sure he was a fan of me. Like, I wasn't sure he was aware of me. Like, I didn't wrestle with it. I believe that there was some higher thing at play here. But, and for the most part, it felt, when I did think about it, it was punishing. Like I had done something out of character. I had lied, cheated, stole, and in the way we do most, high school kids, young people do, like done something out of character that didn't sit well. I talked, I mouthed off to my mom or whatever. And I just was like, I'm going to pay for that one. Like, it's some karmic shit. Like, he's going to get me.
He's the ultimate punisher. Right. That's
Before we go any further on this, I wanted to stop and say Josh's answer, he hesitates. His answer is no. Although he doesn't say no, his answer is no by the answer he gives. But he says some things that are true here and things that just aren't true. So he talks about how he just thought God viewed him as he just wasn't pleased with him. He wasn't happy with him, that he just didn't know him. He didn't pay attention to him or anything like that. We have to understand that God is a loving God. He is a caring God, a merciful, gracious God. Talks about in the scriptures how he collects each of our tears in a bottle. He's extremely present, but he also is a righteous God. And this righteous God has wrath and vengeance and judgment. And so when we are living a life apart from him, there's this blend that God gives us, and it is of mercy and grace, but it is also of wrath and judgment, because as unbelievers, his wrath rests over us, and eventually that wrath will come down on us if we die not knowing Christ and him crucified. So I wanted to address that, but George is going to kind of press more on this in this next clip.
right. Okay. So do you think that was from the form of the industry? Like, if you piss off the guy at the top, you're done.
And this is another great question from George, because you can have that mindset, and it doesn't have to be just in this industry, but this can be just growing up as a kid. If your parents are treating you a certain way, it can embed in you that, oh gosh, if I do something wrong, maybe small, maybe large, whatever it is, oh, my parents are just going to come hard on me. And so you can have this relationship idea of, well, that's how God is towards me. And that's exactly how Josh was feeling, because he was doing things that clearly were going against what he grew up being taught, being Jewish. But he had this idea that God just didn't care, that God wasn't paying attention to him. And you don't have to be in that industry to have that feeling. There are a lot of people out there in this world who have that feeling because of how they were raised simply by their parents or parent.
I know. I just think it was like, I didn't, there's this great sort of modern day philosopher named Alain de Botton. And he talks about that when you have kids, as early as 2, 3 years old, we're teaching them, basically as soon as they get teeth, right? You're teaching them about oral care, right? Like hygiene and how to brush their teeth, and then how to, in the bath, how to wash themselves and like comb their hair and do all these things. And we teach these things, and it's an imperative before they're 5 years old. We don't really teach kids about spiritual health in many respects, right?
Now, before Josh elaborates on this last point that he made, talking about we just don't really teach our kids spiritual health, that is a very true statement. Sadly, God is not the forefront of most people's households anymore. There was a time when, yeah, he was, but that time is dwindling away, and more people are just simply going through their regular days, not implementing the Lord in it at all, not raising their kids up in a way where they understand what sin is, they understand who God is, they understand what the cross represents. None of that really is just being embedded in homes nowadays. Even in so-called Christian homes, people who go to church on a daily basis, there's no Bible reading happening in the home. There's no Christian hymns being sung over the children's in their home. There's no praying being done in their homes. They claim Christianity, but man, they just don't implement it in their own lives. And we see that again in people who claim to be Christians, and especially in those who are just non-Christians. But we need to implement that in our homes. We must teach our kids about sin. We must teach our kids about who Christ was and the importance of what the cross represents. Reading, taking time and going through verses with your children, praying over them and singing hymns over them, that's something that we must implement and put into our homes. Our foundation needs to be built on Christ. He is our cornerstone. And it is such a blessing to see, especially in my own life, with my wife and I's 4-year-old, him singing songs back to us, him talking about Bible verses, him talking about the fruit of the Spirit and what that is, and him going through and talking about the cross, talking about communion and what that represents, the body and blood of Christ, all of those beautiful things. That is something so vitally important that we need to implement in our homes and get back in our homes.
A connection with something bigger, and access points, however they find their journey sort of reveals themselves. So I just didn't have it laid out except for very sort of typical religious sort of, you go for Passover and the high holy days, but there wasn't really an access point at a young age, Hebrew school. And so when I finally, got sober and I started to understand it, for me, it was revealed that there was an opportunity to act godly right now, like right here on earth. And when I act out of character, what I'm doing is I'm robbing myself of that sunshine of the Spirit.
By the way, this is biblical terms you're saying.
Exactly.
That's just crazy that you're saying. That's very, very Proverbs.
And that's to me, any of you could say the Abrahamic religions, but really like Buddhism, Hinduism, and 12-step, and whatever your access point is where the end result is you're a good person, it's just repackaged ancient truths. And it's whatever your access point is, if the means to the end is that you're a good person and you're kind to other people, I'm cool. Get there however you need to.
Now, I wish George would have pressed Josh on this more and pushed back on this more, and this idea of whatever your axe point is, if it's Hinduism, Buddhism, if it's Christianity, whatever it is, however you get to find God and whatever leads you into being a good person, that's all that really matters. I wish George would have pressed him more on this and pushed back. But I left a comment on the George Janko podcast in this interview, and I said this, and on minute 43:35, Josh talks a lot about being a good person. But we need to be reminded that there is none righteous, no, not one, Romans 3:10, and that all our righteousness are like filthy rags, Isaiah 64:6, and that not all ways lead to salvation or freedom. Jesus makes this clear in John 14:6, where he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Josh, I'm praying the Lord opens your blind eyes and deaf ears, and that one day soon you become a born again believer, and that salvation would come through your home. You are leaning on your own good works, and you are telling people they can find God however they please and in whoever they want, so long as they are just a good person. This is a lie, and I'm praying for you, sir. And I am praying for Josh Peck that he would come to saving faith in Christ and that he would understand that true freedom, true salvation, true joy comes from Christ and Him alone. Don't run to Hinduism, Buddhism, uh, atheism, Mormonism, Jehovah. Don't run to those things. Run to Christ. That is who we need to find ourselves falling at the feet of. And that is where we understand we're not relying on our good works. We're just relying on what He did on the cross.